Welcome, everybody. My name is Yuri Engstrom, and it's a great pleasure to introduce Amy Jo Kim on this special functional and fun edition of Google Tech Talks. Amy Jo is CEO of Shufflebrain. She's an internationally known expert in online community architectures. Her company, Shufflebrain, builds smart games for social networks, starting with Facebook. And she's helped design social games and social architecture for a vast number of companies online, companies that everybody knows, like Electronic Arts, Digital Chocolate, Viacom, eBay, and even Yahoo. In 2000, she wrote a book called Community Building on the Web that some of you might know. It's been translated to 6 languages so far. 7! So, it's a great pleasure on behalf of Google to welcome Amy Jo Kim.
Thank you so much for inviting me to be here. It's a pleasure to see you, and I'm looking forward to sharing some of what I've learned in the work I've done and learning from you as well. The interactive portion will happen a little later in the talk. So just to mention, I chose this shot from YouTube for my cover because this is a great example of something I never would have found without game mechanics. This particular video is called Pool Meets Dominoes, and we're dominoes and Rube Goldberg machine freaks in our house. We build them, we love them. And I found this because of the game mechanics on YouTube. And I'll be going into that in a little while. And I'm very happy to have found this video and many others. So briefly, that's a little bit about me. My PhD is in behavioral neuroscience, which is part of why I'm doing brain games, because I'm very familiar with how that stuff works. But I also have a background in science and engineering. And I'm basically a social architect. I do that for games and for social media. At Shufflebrain, I'm working with Scott Kim. Some of you may know Scott. He's a well-known puzzle designer. He's the puzzle columnist for Discover magazine, and he's done a lot of puzzle games on mobile, on the web, and also physical toys. And we're collaborating on the projects I'll be telling you about later today. Some of whom we work with a lot of companies. My latest game that shipped was Rock Band. I was the social architect on that. That was very fun. But also did work applying game mechanics to eBay's infrastructure and those kinds of jobs. So I've been at the intersection of games and social media for a long time. So I wanted to define a few terms, since a lot of these words get thrown around and mean different things. First of all, social media, what is that? You can define it in a lot of different ways. Here's how I define it. 3 key things. 1, player-created content. Now, I use the word player instead of user because I do games, but also I find that if you use the word player yourself when you're designing something, it puts you in a different mindset. So try that sometime in your documents and in your conversations. Just call the people that use your software players and see what happens. So player-created content, stuff that's created by the people that are using the system. Key feature of social media. Social infrastructure, content sharing networks, chat systems, social objects in Jerry's terminology. Social infrastructure is a key aspect of being able to share the artifacts that you create. And the third is tools that make it easy for you to share. If you can't get your video posted, if you can't get your photo up there and tagged, you don't really have the means to share. So those are key elements of anything that you can call social media. What about games? What's a game? Well, the formal definition is a system where players engage in an artificial conflict defined by rules with a quantifiable outcome. That's from an excellent book called Rules of Play that, if you're interested in this stuff, I'd suggest picking up. You can get it on Amazon. Well, that describes a lot of games. That describes chess to some extent. It certainly describes Rock Band and its predecessors and many other games. But there's a whole lot of games that don't fall under that definition. The Sims does not fall under that definition, for instance. Biggest selling PC franchise of all time. And eBay really doesn't fall under that, and yet I would argue that eBay is in many ways a game. So I have an informal definition that I use that's broader, that I find useful when I'm thinking about what a game might be in today's internet. which is a structured experience that has rules and goals that's fun. And a lot more things fall under that category. And that's really what I'm going to be talking about today. Why are games so powerful? Why is everybody all of a sudden, or in the last couple of years, so interested in game mechanics? Well, games basically are incredibly good at manipulating behavior. They get into our primal response patterns. This is a chart from my old days in behavioral psychology. That's what my undergrad degree was in. How many of you know what reinforcement schedules are? Yeah. So you probably recognize this chart. Long story short, the most powerful way to manipulate behavior is to do a variable reinforcement schedule where you get either small or large outcomes without being able to predict what action is going to cause that. And there's many other reinforcement schedules as well, but that's the schedule that keeps people pumping quarters into a one-armed bandit. And if you understand these schedules, you can look at games and say, yeah, this is basically not that different from a pigeon pecking on a lever trying to get a pellet in an experiment. So that is very deep primal stuff. You can see the same behaviors emerging from these patterns of reinforcement in chickens and mice and monkeys and humans. It's very deep stuff. Games also engage us in flow, that term is from a book, it's called Flow, by someone who's got a name I can't pronounce. Mikhail, what is it? Yes, what he said. Yes, it's an incredible book. Every great game designer I know has studied, read, absorbed that book. And basically, the long story short punchline is that an activity that has just the right level of challenge, not too much or you get anxious, not too little or you get apathetic, but just the right level of challenge, and that adjusts the challenge based on your changing skill and mastery, is going to keep you in the flow channel, which is that channel in the middle. Really good games do this. They unfold their challenges over time in conjunction with your evolving mastery. And that style of designing something that changes over time in response to the user, is very much what games do, but it's also what we're seeing more and more in social software now. So game mechanics are the underlying system and features that drive this. Today I'm not going to be talking about the sparkle of great animation and sound. That's also important in games. I'm talking about the mechanics, the behavioral mechanics that engage people. So I'm going to talk about 5 game mechanics today. Think of it as a primer. These are foundational elements. This is not the whole story. This is not a recipe to go out and make a game. These are practical, useful things that you can apply to what you're doing, and they're building blocks. The first one is the collecting game mechanic, and that's basically all about, show me your stuff. What are you collecting? What do you have? It's an expression of what matters to you and the time you've invested in something. It's something you can compare with other people, and it's just a fun human activity. eBay is really built on the urge to collect. Here I show you trading cards, collectible trading cards. I have a 10-year-old kid. My house is full of these things. But also there's my Twitter friends. And my followers. That's another form of collecting, friends on social networks. It has a similar feeling to it. Basically, if you've got a cool collection, you got some bragging rights within the social circle that cares about that collection. Part of the collecting mechanic is the power of completing a set. You know this, people who have collected baseball cards know it. Just cards that let you, that you can buy over the counter at Target, like for Habbo Hotel. Habbo did a brilliant experiment a few years ago where they took the standard cards, you buy it and you get a certain amount of credits, and they just made 4 different kinds and said, collect them all. Boom, their sales went up. You see the same kind of thing now with your profile is 40% completed on Facebook and on LinkedIn. It's the collecting mechanic. It's the completing a set mechanic. Pokemon is incredible at doing this. There's the checklist. So again, this is the kind of thing that if you're trying to get somebody to do something, you can frame it as collecting, and especially make the things that someone's collecting look tangible. You can get a lot of power out of that. Another basic building block is points, earning points. Now, there's a few different kinds of points. There's game points, which are given by the system. For example, you play in Bejeweled and you get a certain number of points. Or in our game, Photograb, I'll talk about that later, you play, you find details in a photo, and you get a certain number of points. That's player-to-system interaction. A more interesting kind of point is what I call social points, and those aren't given by the system. Those are given by other players. So Flickr has a very interesting metric called interestingness that's basically social points. It's a bunch of behaviors of other people, viewing your photos, tagging your photos, discussing your photos, forwarding your photos, putting them in a group. All of that behavior aggregated is distilled into a metric called interestingness. That's a social points metric. YouTube's favorites and ratings are also social points. And social points create a very different dynamic in a system than game points do, because you can't get them just by playing. You have to somehow engage with other people. There's another kind of points, redeemable points, that you see a lot of people using now, especially on systems like Facebook and systems where they're engaging with virtual goods business models. And basically, redeemable points drive loyalty. There's, from S&H green stamps many years ago on up to frequent flyer programs and drugstore.com. If you can have people earn points that they can then redeem for something within the system, either a virtual good or sometimes a physical good or service, you're going to get a lot of loyalty. You're also going to be tweaking something that isn't often talked about because it can sound sexist, but it's really true. One of the biggest barriers to women playing a lot of games is feeling like you're wasting your time. There's a psychology that many, not all, but many females embrace, I certainly do, that I don't like to waste a lot of time. How can you play World of Warcraft for 3 hours? I got kids to feed, that kind of thing. And redeemable points can really play into this, whether you're targeting females or not. That feeling of, I'm not wasting my time, I'm earning points. I'm earning, I'm going to get that toaster for my family or whatever it is. So once you have points, you can have leaderboards. It's kind of as simple as that. And you can choose to have them or not. There's some interesting history with leaderboards backfiring. I know that at Orchid that was an interesting topic. But they drive player behavior. They introduce competitiveness. They also express your community values. If you're going to have leaderboards, what are you celebrating with the leaderboards? Are you celebrating just the person who plays the most? Are you celebrating the person that brings the most friends in? Are you celebrating the person that leaves the most comments on something that's social? That's going to express what's valued in your system. Once you have points, you can also introduce levels. Levels there's nothing magic about them. They're just shorthand for how many points you've earned. It's just an easy way. I was working at eBay when we introduced levels and into the rating system, and all of a sudden, people that had just 890 points were almost at 1,000, and they'd work really hard to get to the next level. It's a way to both express to other people how good you are in shorthand, like with karate belts, but it's also a way to drive behavior and keep people essentially on that treadmill. So the third mechanic is feedback. This is not solely the province of games, but games are particularly good at delivering feedback. And once you have really good feedback, this is going to accelerate your drive to mastery. Anyone who's played any of Harmonix's games, from Karaoke Revolution to Guitar Hero to Rock Band, knows how incredible that company is at making great feedback that makes an exciting experience, but gets you better. You become a better singer by playing the game. Brain Age is another great example. That's a DS base. It was originally DS. It's now on every platform by Nintendo. And it gave you this feedback over time that showed your brain getting younger, which was an incredible hook for a lot of people. So feedback comes in many forms. There's real-time feedback. Yes, I clicked the button, and what I thought I was going to do, I did. Basic real-time feedback, but there's also feedback over time. How are you doing? Are you getting better? How are your friends doing? Et cetera. All that kind of feedback is very engaging, drives engagement, drives repeat use, drives the person toward mastery. Feedback also just plain old adds fun. I would argue that Google Maps, one of the reasons that took off and was so successful, other than incredible product design and engineering, is you just get better feedback with Google Maps. You can move stuff around and you have more control. That's one of the key things. And here's an example of a hit game, big surprise hit game called Cooking Mama. How many of you have ever played Cooking Mama? So great, that's cool. Yeah, so it's this very mundane activity, learning how to cook, and it's all gussied up with this incredible feedback that's just right, and it's, at least for me and for my kid, totally addictive. And so once again, it's just the power to engage you of feedback. Now, just like with points, there's game feedback, but there's also social feedback. Social feedback in the form of, say, notifications on Facebook and people friending you and people retweeting your tweets and all that stuff. That's social feedback. And again, as with points, that's even more powerful. So when you're engineering your systems, thinking about, okay, how am I going to give the person feedback from the system, but also from other people? How are they going to see that? How often are they going to see that? How can I design that to be effective and not overwhelming? Those are all key questions when you're putting great feedback into your system. The fourth is exchanges. An exchange is a structured social interaction, a back and forth, call and response in music, a conversation, taking turns when you're playing chess, trading gifts. Those are all exchanges. And this is a very primal, basic form of social interaction. Many games have this built right in. Chess, checkers, two-player games, any turn-based game is a form of an exchange. Trading, this is a trading screen from WoW. Trading is an exchange. It goes back and forth. Now, both of these are an example of what I would call explicit exchanges. That means that it's built into the actual structure of the system that there's an exchange. Trading has, both people put their objects in, it's held, and then it goes. It is, one person can't do it one way. That's an explicit exchange. There's another kind called implicit or emergent exchanges. And this is even more interesting and potentially more powerful. eBay is a great example of that. You do not have to leave feedback for someone who's left feedback to you. It's not built into the system. We argued about this a lot, too, whether to force it, whether to build it in, like you're forced to do a two-way friend. It's not how eBay works. What happened is that it's become emergent in the social culture of eBay that if somebody leaves you feedback, if you buy something and that person leaves you feedback, they're expecting feedback in return. And you can get some very unpleasant interactions if you don't, depending on the seller. That's an implicit exchange. Another example of that is gifting. In just about every gift application I've seen, as it is in the real world, you don't have to give a gift. It's not built in. It's not like trading. But it engenders obligation when you give someone a gift, and they're likely to give you a gift back or to give you something else back in return. Again, that's implicit exchange. If you have both, you tend to have a richer social environment. Both MySpace and Facebook are good examples of that. Adding a friend is an explicit exchange. It's two-way. As you know, it can be one or two-way. It's two-way. Both have to do it, just as with a trade. However, leaving a comment is more like a gift. You don't have to do it both ways, but people do tend to leave comments for people who've left them for them. So that's letting the exchange be emergent out of the system is something to always think about if you can facilitate that. Customization. Again, a lot of software offers customization. Games are particularly good at it. You can get great ideas from looking at games. Character customization is one basic type. If you're designing your character in WoW, or you're designing your profile on MySpace, you're expressing who you are in a way. And basically, the more fully you're able to do that, the harder it's going to be to leave that system because you're more invested. Another kind is interface customization. If, again, using WoW as an example, you can just customize the hell out of that interface. You can do a lot. And you see that. That's very typical, especially in console games. But we also see a lot of interface customization on the web. I think YouTube's a great example, the extent to which you can customize your channel and really have something that looks different from everything else that's there. That's a good, basic kind of mechanic to offer. So I want to turn the tables a little. And I've been talking about how games are influencing or can influence social media. But what about social media going back and influencing games? What's going on there? So there's a few trends that I'm very interested in and I've been following. The first is making software accessible. And there's three things I mean by that. One is making the UI accessible. We've seen a dramatic increase in easy-to-use UIs the last couple of years. It's a big thing. Partly it's the changing demographics. Partly it's Ruby on Rails and other ways of letting people build stuff quickly. But it's also just an expectation. It's competition. There's people like Google, I think, pioneered the easy-to-use interface, and a lot of people are following that. The second is devices. You see more and more web services launching, and they reach out to many different devices, wherever you are. It runs on the web. There's all these clients. It runs on your cell phone. Twitter's a good example of that. And the third is open APIs. Make software much more accessible and much more able to live in different forms. If you're developing a service, that's something that makes sense. All of those are part of a trend of software becoming dramatically more accessible to more people. The second trend is what I call recombinant data objects. And what I mean by that is more and more social media services and software services are allowing their basic data objects to be remixed and redistributed. YouTube is a good example of that. Flickr, Twitter. They all have basic data objects that you can search and sort and then deliver different feeds of, and people can have different clients that run on them. And all of this is enabled by this very basic architecture, which might seem obvious, but if you're coming from games, most games aren't designed that way. They're not designed to be recombinant. And the third is syndicated. Now, this is built on top of, once you've got a recombinant data objects in some sort of content sharing network, you can basically syndicate that if you choose to. YouTube was an early leader in that by allowing people to post videos on their blogs. So I'm using the term syndicated in a very pure sense, which means content that lives outside of where its source was. And you see more and more services that aren't just a destination, or maybe not even primarily a destination site, which is what I think of as the older model for Web 2.0, but really live everywhere and are generating a constant stream of content that lives many different places in many different forms, remixed and also reskinned. So I want to do a few quick case studies. And this is the part where, if you're so inclined, I'd love to have you tell me what you think, just by raising your hands or calling out about, I'm going to pose some questions, okay? So I think YouTube has done a great job of integrating game mechanics in a very natural way into their software. And I like to use it as an example. So first of all, what do you collect on YouTube? Anybody? Favorites. You collect favorites. Anything else? You collect subscribers. Anything else? I collect videos. I have my list. I feel like I have my videos. So the point is, there's a lot of things you can collect on YouTube. That's why I showed the list, all those different things. One of the things YouTube could do, if they wanted to make the collecting mechanic more powerful, was to make your collection look more like a collection to the player. That just make it feel and look more tangible. That's one way to drive with that mechanic. How do you earn points on YouTube? Star ratings, views. See that whole list? All of those are ways to earn points. Again, YouTube has multiple parallel leaderboards. That's what I would call them. And that's great, because that means there's a lot of different ways to rise to the top. There's a lot of different ways to get your moment. There's a lot of different ways to explore and discover content. So that's very powerful. How do you get feedback on YouTube? Comments. You also get feedback with something called the video response. Oh, I guess I have that in the next one. Sorry, it's an example of exchange. And then there's this inbox that shows you people, messages, things people have shared with you. Another way you get feedback on YouTube is stats. I circled that there on the right of the screen. YouTube gives you a bunch of stats. That's another great way to get feedback. In some systems, stats can be an alternative to leaderboards. If leaderboards introduce a competitive element that's not working for you, you can surface stats, like you're in the top 15%, that sort of thing. So that's something that, as game designers, we're often thinking about. Where can you have an exchange, that one-to-one exchange on YouTube? Does it offer that? Well, I would argue that the video response is one form of exchange. It's that back and forth feeling. Comments are another form of exchange. But there's probably room to do something else interesting there with videos and exchanges to make it more game-like. And then the fifth is, so how do you customize your experience on YouTube? This is an example of a customized channel. Do any of you who use YouTube, have you done anything else to customize your experience?
Customize your own profile page.
Right, so you can customize your profile. That's skinning it, right? And can you determine what's on there? So you can kind of decide which widgets are there. Yeah, these are all ways of customizing your experience, which gives you a different experience, but more importantly, it lets you present a version of yourself, a version of what you want to show to other people in a way that you control. So, is the service accessible? I would argue yes. I think one of the main reasons YouTube took off, there's many reasons, is you can upload videos really easily. It takes different formats, it walks you through it. That was a big thing when they launched. It was a big thing for me, getting my videos up there so easy. Runs on a lot of different platforms, runs on mobile, very easy to use. You send somebody a link, my mom can use it. All those checkpoints. I think it has an open API, correct? Yes, yeah, so that whole trend, YouTube's right out there. Are the data objects recombinant? Yep. You can have different sorts and streams of videos. It's pretty easy to put together a playlist. Not a problem. Can the service be syndicated? Absolutely. It's continuing to innovate in that space, and it was an early leader. So now let's take a look at Twitter. Very different service, but has some of the same trends flowing through it. What do you collect on Twitter? Anybody? Followers. You also collect friends, but really you collect followers. And you see that, and part of it is the way it's expressed visually, as you can see here. But it's also what people brag about. It's what people are, measuring as valuable. How do you earn points? Well, on this page, you can see there's points. Anything that's a number, people are going to think it's a point. They just are. So there's updates, followers, and following. There's services like Twitterholic that turn this into leaderboards. Twitter itself doesn't have leaderboards. They don't need to. They have an open API. Somebody else built it. How do you get feedback on Twitter? Do you guys use Twitter? Right, so there's several different ways to get feedback. And what's great is that you can decide which of those you want to get in email, if you live in your email. I personally still live in my email client. So where do you have exchanges? Same thing, really. @replies, direct messages. That's how you have exchanges. They probably could express the exchanges a little more concretely, and that would amp up the power. But basically, they have the underlying mechanisms to do it. And what we're seeing is that a lot of the innovation in the UI is coming from the third-party clients, not from the main service. Can you customize your experience on Twitter? A little bit. You can have a custom background. So this is my favorite custom background so far. This guy, it's just an image. He made this custom background that looks amazing for a custom background. So people are getting very creative within those constraints. And again, I think there's a lot of room that Twitter could improve with customization, but the direction that service is going is to leave a lot of that kind of front-end improvement and innovation into the third-party clients. And if they can just figure out a business model, that whole thing should work really well. Is the service accessible? What do you think? I'd say dramatically. Super easy to use. Super easy to get on your desktop, on your mobile, wherever you want. Super easy, and importantly, super easy to integrate. Integrate with photos, integrate with all different kinds of services. Are the data objects recombinant tweets? Absolutely. And all the flurry of activity around them is partly based on just the basic fact that you have this simple recombinant data model. Can the service be syndicated? And is it syndicated? Yep, definitely. It's you can put it on your blog. You can put it all different kinds of places, and it takes many different forms. Part of that is because of the simplicity of the service and of text, but nonetheless, I think it's a great example of these trends. So now I want to talk a little bit about the project that we at Shufflebrain have been working on for the last 6 months. It's called Photograb, and it's basically our first small steps in a larger vision of brain games, that is, games that are good for your brain, meets social media, the ongoing stream of your experiences and your artifacts that are generated by interacting socially online. So Photograb is, first of all, how many of you have played Photograb? Okay, so that's something fun you can try later. It's search for Photograb on Facebook. You'll go right there. If you go to shufflebrain.com, it's linked on the front page. It's very easy to find. So I'll take you through this quickly. So in Photograb, what do you collect? Well, there's two things. On the left-hand side, this is my profile. Actually, it's another player's profile. You collect awards, badges. This is a very common game mechanic that I'm starting to see other people introduce into non-game software. If you've ever played Xbox Live, they have a great award system. And you're seeing more and more of this. It's basically you say, okay, you've done X, you've played 5 games, you've shared your game, you've gotten 5 people to play your game, et cetera. All these little achievements, you mark them with collectible badges, and then you both tell people what you expect them to do, but you also give them something they can show off and get a sense of achievement for. The more that you expand your identity, and this is a form of expanding your identity, all the badges you've earned, just like being a Boy Scout. The more you do that, the harder it is to leave the service because you've developed your identity and people get very attached to that. You also collect games. You can create games and play games, and we make them visible, all the games you've ever played or created. We could certainly do a better job of making it look like a collection. So I think there's a lot of room for improvement in our own software there. So how do you earn points? Well, there's quite a few ways. The basic one is you play games and you level up. You do better, you get faster and better at the game. You improve your skill. You can earn points that way. You can also earn points for leaving comments. You can earn social points. And most importantly, you can earn points by creating your own games, which, by the way, takes about 3 minutes. It's very easy. And having other people play those games. And those are all ways. So there's a variety of ways to achieve within the system. How do you get feedback? Again, there's a couple of main ways. Within the game itself, in a very, I would say, a traditional game way, we give you feedback after you've played. How did you do? It's social. You can see how you did against everyone else who's played that game, friends and everyone. You can also see how your rating is, how it affected your rating, and how that's related to your friends' ratings as well. And that's in-game feedback. Pretty good, standard stuff. Makes you want to get better. But we also have a lot of out-of-game or metagame feedback, especially in the form of notifications. So when you've created a game and people play it, you get notified. If people leave a comment, you say, hey, respond to their comment. If somebody that is on your friend list passes you, you get notified. And these are all more social graph ways to give people feedback. It's what I would call social feedback. What about exchanges? I think this is actually one of the weaker parts of our current game, partly just because we're in beta and we've only built out so much. We have comments, and the comments are nice. You can leave comments in-game and also on the HTML game pages. And you can have notifications that function as exchanges, similar to how comments function as exchanges in YouTube. I think that in a game, another kind of exchange to look at, and this is something we're currently in the midst of designing, is challenges. And you can also apply this to general software. So you can have the social exchange, comments, et cetera, but you can have a challenge. You know, hey, I got this score on this game, or I got this total score on these 3 games. Can you beat me? And those are another kind of exchange that's game-like that's also can be applied pretty broadly. Can you customize your experience in our game? Yes, you can have custom backgrounds for your game, and the game itself customizes what you see. So this is the home page there on the left. That's the home page of the metagame, where you're seeing what's available to you to play. And that's completely customized for each person. That each list you see is essentially a feed. So you get notified there when your friends have created new games, when your friends have leveled up, when they've earned certain achievements, when they've played, etc. So that, in and of itself, that's a different kind of customization. There's skinning, which is very visual, but there's also data customization, where what you're shown is really customized to who you are and who your relationships are. Is the service accessible? This is the thing we probably worked the hardest on, is making an extremely easy to use and accessible both game UI and also game creation. Went through a lot of iteration. I know you at Google are familiar with that. And made something that, you know, my mother, who's in her 70s, could use. That was one of our targets, was 8 to 80. We designed this to train the brain so that older people could use it. But also, we believe brain training is an everyday life activity. We don't think it's, old people in a retirement home only for them with a white guy with a white lab coat shaking his finger. That's today's kind of brain games. But we think of brain games as just games that are good for your brain, games that are designed to not screw up your life and get you addicted and, playing all the time, games that are designed to be healthy in every sense of the word for your brain, but also for your lifestyle. And so that's what we're striving for here. I think we got the interface well. We're working on the API right now on turning this into a platform so that it can live in a lot of other places, which is the other piece of accessibility that social media has really led the way on. Are the data objects recombinant? This is something where I feel that we're at least trying to innovate in saying, okay, how do you make games into recombinant data objects that can have feeds and be sorted and delivered and blogged and all the things that you can do with recombinant data objects. So each of our games is 3 to 5 images. Each image gets marked up just like you mark it up with tags, but you're marking it up with details, and then stored. So you can both recombine the photos you've marked up into new games, and you can say, oh, I took a trip to the beach, and I remember I made that game. I can use those photos from the beach and add one more, and I have a new game. So it's recombinant within the system. But it's also recombinant outside of the system in that you can just have feeds, and we actually have that in the game now. You could subscribe to a game feed of everyone's games, your friends' games, just this one friend's games, however you like. And so that's something we're really pushing on and think will become more popular as more and more games are built to live everywhere, not just in one place. And can the service be syndicated? Yes, because of the recombinant data objects. We have a widget that shows you the latest games that's on shufflebrain.com, and it's live. And we're working on widgets for external clients that will show the stream of games that's specific to their content. So that's some of what we've been thinking about games and social media. I'm really interested to hear about what you're thinking now in the Q&A, but also please feel free to go to shufflebrain.com, share your thoughts in the comments, send an email, join the discussion. And here's my contact info. If any of you want to follow me or email me or play the game, feel free to friend me on Facebook, and then you'll have access to all the games I've created. So that's it. Q&A?
Well, thanks a lot, Amy. I think we have a few more minutes for questions. So just please raise your hand and voice your question. And then, Amy, if you could please repeat the question so we get it recorded for the talk. Thanks.
The thing that first drew my attention to your talk is that I'm working on a project where we're creating a programming environment for people who are not programmers to make it sort of easy to write Android programs. And I'm wondering, I imagine that a lot of this could apply there, but some of the stuff I don't, completely see, like coins and exchanges and things. I'm wondering if you thought about how this applies in the context of programming or mashups or anything like that.
So you're correct in that it doesn't all have to apply. So I'm sorry. So the question is, Sharon, right? Sharon is designing a programming environment for non-programmers to write Android programs and wonders how this applies, how these ideas apply to her programming environment. So the short answer is, it's completely contextual, and I can't really answer that without knowing more about your programming environment. What I can tell you is that there's some low-hanging fruit here that you can apply immediately. Feedback is, I think, a very obvious one. Giving people really good and really fun feedback, putting a little energy into making the feedback fun, huge payoff. And again, that accelerates mastery. So that's when people ask me, what if I just had to pick one? I'll usually point them to feedback because it's so accessible. And then also, don't forget about that feedback over time. How am I doing? Am I getting better? Showing people that they're getting better is tremendously powerful in making them feel confident and making them feel like they want to keep learning. So that's one place to start.
So customization being an important aspect of this, how do you balance that when the customization is of the game itself? In other words, your customization is impacting the experience of other players.
question is, how do you deal with customization when you're customizing the game itself and your experience is impacting other players? Do you have a specific example?
MySpace versus Facebook.
But-
So MySpace offers a great deal of customization in terms of the content, but that level of customization can change the usability of the system.
You mean the ugly profiles?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because that's a really great point. So the question, MySpace versus Facebook. MySpace, people have tremendous variety of options for customizing their profiles. Music, graphics, animation, blue text on a light blue background, all that stuff. And this really impacts the readability and the perceived quality of the profiles. So how do you balance that? Is that correct? So I would argue that MySpace, one of the reasons MySpace took off in the way it did, it's no longer the new darling, but I mean, it really took off, was exactly that power of customization. And as a designer, I'm horrified. But as a social architect, I look at that and say, man, are they smart? And I look at MySpace profiles kind of like the room of a teenager, especially if you look at who the demographic is. It's, you walk into a teenager's room, there's music blaring, there's posters all over the wall, there's clothes on the floor. It's just like a mess, right? But it's them, and that's what it's about. But it's my mess if you're a teenager. And I think that this is my mess, this is my expression, be it loud and obnoxious and not particularly well designed, is for the MySpace demographic, for the people that use it. That's just what they want. And it has definitely differentiated MySpace in terms of their who their core audience is. You don't have nearly that much freedom on Facebook. Facebook is much more of a communication medium than a self-expression medium, partly because of the affordances of what's there, to your point. So I think the answer is you need to know who your audience is. And sometimes your audience isn't who you thought they were. Who knows if MySpace set out to be that, but once you know who your audience is and what you want, you basically deliver what they want. And I think that that level of customization very much gave the people that were, teenagers and young people finding their identity, experimenting with different identities. It gives you a lot of power that way. It also gives up-and-coming musicians, which is in a sense the core DNA of MySpace, a way to really differentiate and express themselves. And I think as people grow more sophisticated, because people aren't going to just reproduce MySpace, so they're going to do something new and different, you can find ways to take that level of powerful self-expression and make it a little bit more well-designed. So put just a few constraints on it is probably what we're going to see more of in upcoming services that tackle that. But I think there's a lot of wisdom in those ugly profiles in terms of what the audience actually wants.
So, if you include a lot of game-like elements in any kind of design, do you think that it privileges people who are competitive or who are just interested in, getting the highest score? How does that interact with, say, trying to get really high-quality content? So
That's great.
People just want to post a lot of videos, or do they want to post good videos? Or how do you balance that?
So the question is, if you add a lot of game mechanics to your software, does that privilege the competitive people that just want to get a lot of points? And YouTube is one example where there's both people posting a lot of videos and people posting high-quality videos. So neither one of those is right. I mean, I think YouTube as a service, serves both people. The high-quality videos probably do more for YouTube in terms of its business model and where it's trying to go, but without all those people uploading it, YouTube couldn't be where it is today. So your specific question, does it privilege the competitive types when you have a lot of game mechanics? It depends on how you actually reward and surface the results of the game mechanics. So I can just speak to our own experiment with Photograb, which is still in beta, it's pretty new. On Facebook, we have a lot of competitive elements. We also very specifically created a non-competitive thread to make it so that if you weren't competitive, you could still gain some fame, you could still have your games surfaced, you could still have people play them, et cetera. And what we've learned is that our audience naturally subdivides. And we've got maybe a fourth or a fifth of our total players are rabid gamers, and they're competing, and you can see that when somebody passes them, they get really competitive and pass them again. It's great for us. They're playing a lot of games. You know, they're generating an interesting dynamic for us. But it's not the majority of the people. The majority of the people are playing a game every now and then. They're creating a game out of their vacation photos to share with their friends because they think it's a more fun way to share their photos, which is really the point of our software. And those people aren't playing competitively. When we look at our analytics and look at the play patterns, we get this like obsessive 20, 30 games at a time play pattern over several weeks, and then it'll sort of die out for the competitive ones. For the other ones, they'll come back a couple times a week, maybe miss a week, then they'll come back, and they'll play in this way that we actually designed it. We designed it not to be played obsessively. We designed it to be played in a healthy way, which is a little bit all the time. And so we've struck that balance. If you look at the leaderboards, those people aren't in the leaderboards, but our leaderboards aren't front and center. They're there if you're interested, but they're not in your face. You could never see the leaderboards and have a great experience and have all kinds of social engagement. That was what we tried to do to strike a balance. I think the challenge as a game designer who's embracing social media is to get enough engagement without the obsessive play that people will actually keep coming back and you can make a viable business. And part of why people use game mechanics and do that obsessive form of play is that those are often people you can extract money out of. So what we're trying to do is create this very healthy style of gaming that can generate enough volume and enough business that that can be the primary mode of play, not the hyper-competitive. Yes?
So one of the themes that's kind of run through some of the questions here is that, you know, as you incentivize people to interact more, you start to get a little bit of almost an information overload. You know, you are successful, you have lots of interactions. I've just recently started working on products like mobile Gmail and calendar where, you know, they're all about interaction, but in fact, it's really about how do you incentivize someone to get points for sending a really good email rather than just spamming everyone. You know, it's kind of, I'm trying to think about ways, how do we deal with a situation where you actually are more about trying to filter out stuff and just highlight the quality stuff rather than just try to generate people to play more?
That's a great question. So the question is, how can you use game mechanics and specifically points to reinforce and surface high quality rather than volume? Is that correct? So, well, one thing that you should always ask yourself is points the right mechanic for what I'm trying to do? Personally, when I've seen people try and attach points to email, I have not seen that work. I'm not a fan of that. However, if somebody gets it just right, it'll be fine. But that, to me, doesn't seem like a natural fit for the points mechanic. So one thing is step back and say, am I using the right mechanic? That's one way to reinforce. The traditional or the more common ways of surfacing quality is crowdsourcing through ratings or through, you know, metrics like interestingness, but that takes time. To do crowdsourcing, you have to have people play it, and then you get the rating, et cetera. We have that within our system as well. But if you're trying to do it in real time, and you're trying to reinforce quality, again, the devil's in the details. I would have to know in detail what the challenge was and then which game mechanics in the bag of tricks to apply to it. But basically, if there's two things, you can give people points. That's a system can give people points, or you can try and crowdsource it with social points. Another thing you can do, another tool you can use, which isn't so much a game mechanic tool, it's more a community management tool, is to shine the spotlight where you want it to be. And this is a trick that you see in everything from MMOs to, you know, very simple social games and social environments. If you can find a way to highlight and surface the best games, the best game creators, the best emails, et cetera, through some metric, whether it's editorial or it's statistically generated, then people will see that, they will follow it, they will do more of that. So one of the most powerful ways to shape behavior is kind of technological role modeling. Show people the behaviors up front and center in the environment in a way that is celebrated. And that's another trick. Yes, in the back. Get starved?
So in Gmail, you can star an email in your inbox. It means that it's important to you in some way. For each person, that's different what that means. But it'd be a form of reward that was completely independent of giving anything back to the sender, or at least in the mind of the recipient, it might be. And then generally, I was wondering if that's a kind of reward that you see systems employing, or if it would be one that would make sense to you. Is that not explicitly rewarding the creator, the rewarder not explicitly rewarding the creator, but instead rewarding the reward through patterns of use.
So let me make sure. Right, so let me make sure I understand. So the question is, in Gmail, so in Gmail you can star the messages that are important to you. And so that does that information flow back in any way? Do you think it should? I mean, it could. Depends how you do it. There's a few different ways to do it. One of the tricks that game designers sometimes use to balance that kind of potential system problem is to give you a limited number. So one thing you could do is say, you have X stars a day or X stars total. You have you make it a limited resource, and that can do like 90% of your work in terms of balancing a system, because then you're not just going to star indiscriminately, you're going to star the ones that are important to you. But considering how to feed that back to the user seems like the person who sent it, seems like it's got some problems, but it's potentially a great idea and worth pushing on, because that can give you that kind of feedback that, one, makes it more compelling and game-like, and two, will drive quality, to Jerry's point. Uno más. Mike.
Google web search has been very successful in appealing product to a very wide range of ages, nationalities, and types of users. It doesn't seem at all obvious that you can come up with one set of game dynamics, one set of social dynamics that actually works for such a wide range of people. Is it actually realistic to be trying to find game mechanics that work in a product as general to like Gmail, or is that really only going to be relevant for sort of niche communities?
You mean, so the question is, does it make sense to look for universal game mechanics that could apply to a product like Gmail and everyone who uses it, or is it more something that would be relevant for a niche community?
Or a particular age group or a particular nationality or community?
Right, so the game mechanics I talked about today are pretty basic, and they're pretty human, and they apply broadly. Whether any one of those game mechanics makes sense in Gmail is a question that has to be looked at in the whole context, first of all. There isn't like Gmail should or shouldn't have points. I don't know. Each of those, and there's many other game mechanics I didn't talk about today that might actually be great for something like Gmail. But the general idea of game mechanics, I would say that the basics of like how powerful it is to collect something and see your collection, that's universal. Whether it makes sense is not. But points, earning points and leaderboards tends to not be as effective with older people, for example. It depends. I mean, if you get the 50-year-old women who are playing Bejeweled 24 hours a day, then that's a separate issue. But in general, people that have grown up with games. So there's a dividing line that we see a lot just in play patterns. People that have grown up with games, grown up with consoles and Nintendo, et cetera, and now have grown up with playing game-like experiences on the web, tend to be much more comfortable with and not as stressed out by things like points and leaderboards. I've done a lot of user testing for clients, and I've seen older people just really get stressed out. They might be motivated by points, but it stresses them out. Oh no, now I'm performing, and it's just not necessarily a great technique. But something like really good feedback, that's universal. And showing people getting better over time, I would say that's really universal. I think the presentation layer, the layer of what you show, is incredibly important. And if you show a leaderboard that looks like a leaderboard someone saw on a game they once played, bingo, that's the association they're going to make. If you show someone a search box that looks like the Google homepage, bingo. So the game mechanics, generally useful, not applicable all the time. The presentation, I think, that's where often having different presentation layers for different niches you can see a lot more success with that because of the associations people have with a particular experience. I'm not sure if that answered your question, but okay. Thank you guys for the great questions and for having me here.